December of 1962. A light frost dusts the National Mall. The geese have all flown south for the winter. Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona sits at his desk, a stern expression on his face as he gazes out the window at a flurry of snowflakes dancing about in the wind and landing on the sidewalks and brick facades across the street. His office is adorned with framed certificates and mementos of his political career. The radiator gurgles. Somehow his office always manages to be too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer. Goldwater's eyes drift to the ornate chessboard set up on a small round table nearby. The pieces are meticulously arranged, awaiting his command. Each piece is trimmed with gold leaf, carved out of beautiful walnut. The glossy finish on his board is protected by a thin layer of glass, and the trim around the edges is carved in such a way that it mimics the facade of a Chicago skyscraper. The set was a gift to him from the former Ohio Senator John Bricker, and it hadn't been used yet, but Goldwater insisted the board be maintained and cleaned to a shine. There was never an opponent across the board from Goldwater, for his was a solitary game. Goldwater's eyes returned to the snowflakes fluttering outside. Like the crystals of snow, he let his thoughts drift as well, to the political landscape of the nation. He sat up in his chair, clicking a pen over and over in his hand. Goldwater believed that the Kennedy administration was too soft on communism, a sentiment echoed by a growing number of Americans. The recent accommodation of Castro by Kennedy's administration, despite potentially avoiding war with Cuba and the Soviets, left the public questioning Kennedy's resolve to defeat communism even at home in North America. Goldwater paused for another moment before reaching out and making his first move on the chessboard. The sound of the piece sliding across the polished surface was the only noise that could be perceived in his silent office. He sat for a second, then rose, picking up a small manila folder from his desk, and exited the room. January of 1963 in Phoenix, Arizona. Barry Goldwater strode confidently onto the stage, the bright sun capturing the intensity in his eyes. With commanding gestures, he outlined his vision for America, a highly conservative approach which emphasized the need for strong leadership in the face of communist threats. He launched a calculated political attack on President Kennedy, accusing him of sympathizing with communism and betraying American values. The crowd in Phoenix roared with approval as Goldwater declared his candidacy for president, promising to restore integrity and strength to the nation. Later that night at a banquet in downtown Phoenix, Goldwater sat at a round table of political activists, governors, and fellow senators. Securing endorsements from grassroots conservatives, the candidate bolstered his campaign. Despite these successes, however, Goldwater was approached by his peers in the Senate. Many of the moderate Republicans were unsatisfied with his platform and extreme stances on certain issues. Likewise, at the White House, President Kennedy sat behind the resolute desk, flanked by a group of stern-faced Democratic politicians. Tension hung thick in the air as they pressed him to replace Vice President Lyndon Johnson with Stuart Symington on his re-election ballot. The move would be nearly suicidal, let alone unprecedented. Charts and documents littered the desk, detailing alleged corruption charges against Johnson. Kennedy listened intently, shielding his unpleasant expression with his hand as the politicians laid out their case against Johnson. Kennedy's jaw tightened, his expression betraying the weight of the decision he faced. Despite the gravity of the situation, Kennedy maintained a composed demeanor, slightly weighing his options as the politicians continued to press him. The fate of his administration hung in the balance as he grappled with the political maneuvering unfolding before him. Goldwater's campaign bus was a constant whirlwind of commotion through the election cycle, surrounded on all sides by aides and advisors poring over maps and schedules. Goldwater was constantly on the move. He spent every second at town halls and shopping centers, meeting union workers and farmers and vendors, rallying on stages and in venues. His charisma could have used some work, but his policies and promises were nonetheless appetizing to the crowds he gathered. After each tour, Goldwater retreated to his office, moving an ornate piece silently. His strategy emerged with each mile traveled and each speech delivered. His campaign was smoothly unfolding, at least thus far. November of 1963 in Austin. Barry Goldwater stood at a podium addressing a crowd of supporters with passion and conviction. He began by paying homage to the Lone Star State, praising its spirit of independence and resilience. He gave his typical dance of conservative principles and the threat of communism, but as he looked into the crowd, he felt a sense of foreboding dread. The sun glinted off of something in the crowd, some sort of mirror or metal object. Suddenly, chaos erupted as a gunshot rang out, followed by screams of panic. Goldwater staggered backward, clutching his shoulder in agony as blood stained his shirt. Police rushed to prevent a stampede as the crowd ran to leave the venue. The first responders and security protected Senator Goldwater as he was brought to an ambulance. Police swarmed the venue, their sirens wailing and lights flashing in the midday sun. Bystanders gathered on sidewalks, their faces etched with confusion and fear. At the center of the commotion stood Lee Harvey Oswald, his hands bound behind his back as officers led him away from the scene. His face was a mask of defiance, his eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and determination as he was escorted to a waiting police car, his lips curiously silent as he was brought away. Reporters and cameras jostled for position, capturing the dramatic moment on film as Goldwater was driven to the hospital and Oswald to the jail. Within hours, Goldwater laid on a hospital bed, surrounded by concerned doctors and clamored at by reporters. Despite his injuries, however, his spirit remained unbroken as he flashed a reassuring smile to those gathered around him. His humor and grace under fire endeared him to the American public. Across the United States, televisions crackled and radios whined as they were tuned to the presidential debates. The nominees from the Republican and Democratic parties took the stage: former Senator Barry Goldwater and incumbent President John F. Kennedy. Goldwater stood tall at his podium, his jaw tightly closed. He locked eyes with Kennedy across the stage. The candidates wasted no time launching into their opening statements, each vying for control of the narrative. Kennedy touted his record of leadership and calls for unity, while Goldwater continued his typical conservative spiel. As the debate progressed, the exchanges between Goldwater and Kennedy became increasingly heated. They sparred over issues ranging from foreign policy to domestic affairs, each seizing every opportunity to score points against the other. Goldwater accused Kennedy of weakness in the face of communism, while Kennedy fired back with accusations of extremism and fear-mongering. Despite his injuries, Goldwater's resolve seemed more poignant than ever. He whipped the crowd into a fury with his words, the moderator struggling to maintain order as the debate reached a fever pitch, the candidates talking over each other in their eagerness to make their points. But amidst the chaos, the contrast between Goldwater's unyielding resolve and Kennedy's strained but seemingly cool composure became increasingly apparent. The debates concluded, and America was left to make her decision. The grandeur of the United States Capitol provided a majestic backdrop as Barry Goldwater stood before a sea of onlookers, his hand raised high as he took the oath of office. As Goldwater completed the oath, the crowd erupted, waving American flags and chanting his name. With a proud smile, he turned to address the nation for the first time as President of the United States. In a historic upset, Goldwater managed to narrowly defeat the incumbent John F. Kennedy. The inaugural ballroom was a dazzling display of elegance and sophistication, with chandeliers casting a warm glow over the festivities. Goldwater and his wife Margaret greeted the guests with warmth and grace as they made their way through the crowded room. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd as John F. Kennedy entered the room, flanked by his wife Jacqueline. As Kennedy approached, Goldwater extended his hand in a greeting, a genuine smile lighting up his face. Kennedy reciprocated the gesture, his expression a mix of respect and admiration as he clasped Goldwater's hand firmly. Their brief exchange was filled with unspoken camaraderie, a recognition of the shared burdens and responsibilities of the presidency. For a fleeting moment, political differences faded away as two men bound by duty and honor came together to celebrate the peaceful transition of power that defined American democracy. As Kennedy walked away from the White House, however, his smile faded into a look of worry. A Secret Service agent shut the door behind Kennedy as he was driven to the airport on a flight bound for Boston. Goldwater entered the Oval Office. He stretched his arms and began unpacking his things with the help of some aides. As he unloaded a cardboard box of small desk objects, he paused. In his hands, he unfolded the ornate chessboard and placed it at the center of the Resolute desk. He meticulously rearranged the board just as it had been in his office, correcting and centering each piece on its square. Within only 3 weeks of Goldwater's presidency, the Situation Room was a hive of activity. President Goldwater, surrounded by his top advisors and department heads, grappled with the first major challenge of his time in office: nuclear weapons tests in the People's Republic of China. Maps and charts cover the walls, displaying the locations of known and possible Chinese and Soviet nuclear facilities and military installations. Goldwater sat at the head of the table, massaging his temples in deep concentration as he listened to the heated debate raging around him. Military brass argued for a show of force, while diplomats urged caution to avoid escalation with China. As the discussion wore on, tensions mounted and voices grew louder. Goldwater listened intently, weighing the arguments on both sides as he considered the implications of each course of action. Quietly, he arose from his seat. He strode purposefully towards the map of Chinese nuclear facilities, studying it with laser-like focus. He turned to his advisors, his voice steady and unwavering as he stated his goal to launch a covert attack on the Chinese nuclear program. The room instantly returned to a flurry of activity as orders were issued, and Goldwater's advisors sprung into action, coordinating with military commanders and intelligence agencies to execute the daring operation. As the hours ticked by, tension mounted and nerves frayed. But Goldwater remained steadfast. The typewriter's keys clicked, embroidering the page with the name of his plan: Death by 1,000 Cuts. The covert strikes were carried out with precision and efficiency, striking a crippling blow to China's nuclear program. As news of the operation spread, tensions with China escalated, raising the stakes in the global power struggle. Goldwater watched as the events unfolded, anticipating a immediate response. His presidency had thus far been defined by his willingness to take bold action in defense of American interests. And as the dust settles on the successful operation, he knows that his legacy as a decisive leader has been secured. He listened intently as reports came in from around the globe. In Vietnam and Korea, US-backed guerrillas struck strategic blows against communist forces, destabilizing their grip on power. In Cuba, anti-communist movements gained momentum with support from the Goldwater administration, causing headaches for Castro's regime. Meanwhile, covert agents operated behind enemy lines in China, exploiting internal divisions and sowing chaos within the communist government. Reports of sabotage and subterfuge filtered in, evidence of the success of Goldwater's clandestine operations. As the last meeting of the day drew to a close, Goldwater surveyed the room with satisfaction. A cut in China, a cut in Vietnam, a cut in Korea, a cut in Cuba, a cut in the Philippines, a cut at home. Cuts shed blood, and blood runs red. The world has been marked by the United States of America, and there is no turning back now. As the sun dipped behind the Appalachian Mountains, off in the distant west behind Washington, D.C., Goldwater's advisors, strategists, and diplomats scurried back to their homes and offices. The Oval Office was eerily silent. A clock ticks on the wall, its sound growing louder and then falling softer, as Goldwater leans back in his chair. He then gets up, stretches his legs, and walks towards a small round table in the room, upon which his chessboard lies. He makes the final move. Checkmate. Death by 1,000 cuts. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.